Thank you for joining us for this sermon podcast from United Church on the Green, located in New Haven, Connecticut. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are invited and welcome. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to learn more about our open and affirming ministry at United Church on the Green, please visit our website at unitednewhaven.org. Thank you.
Isabella just said that she had made some cards for people that she loves, and she calls it the Giving Club. I think that's a wonderful thing. Would you pray with me, please? Dear God, will you please open our hearts and our minds, our eyes and our ears, that we might hear the word, the gospel that you've given us today. Amen. In the gospel reading this morning from the book of Luke, Jesus is in a crowd with his disciples, and a man approaches him and wants him to arbitrate a dispute. He asks him a question, one that would appear to be of a civil nature, and I look forward to talking to John Blue about that later, whether or not it was a civil discourse or not. But he and his brother are arguing over an inheritance. Now, how often I see this in my work with siblings or with families of a dying person or in a divorce or in an emotional breakup. But Jesus answers his question by turning the question back to him, which he always does in such a clever way, which therefore gives us no answer, and we have to take that question and ponder it ourselves. But he uses this opportunity to talk about the right relationship with money and earthly possessions. Now, from all that we know, this rich man was not a bad man. He hadn't stolen anything. He was a hard-working farmer. He was not wicked. It doesn't appear either that his wealth was ill-gotten. He wasn't a tax collector who had shaken money illegally out of anyone. Apparently, he was wealthy because of a hard work ethic, and everything had come by honest means and by the sweat of his brow. He wants to save for the future. Who of us doesn't? Right? Who of us doesn't? Are you with me? So building a larger barn for more space for abundant harvest seems like a very reasonable decision, right? But Reverend Scarborough suggests that we notice in the reading the emphasis on the word me. In this short internal dialogue, consisting of approximately 60 words, the man uses 11 referencing to himself and the personal pronouns I and my. If we add the references to soul and to self and you as part of that internal dialogue about himself, then would you believe it, but we have 22% of the words in this short passage talking about, well, me. Here is part of this man's spiritual illness. He is all about the unholy trinity of me, myself, and I. There are no references to all others, not to family, not to friends, and certainly no reference to God. He is under the mistaken belief that all this wealth is his possession, his to control, and that he alone produced the wealth. This is mine. This is mine. This is all mine, he says. You see, one's life does not belong to one, no matter how rich one is. Things can possess us. There is no protection from the uncertainties of life. While I was in Mexico for my study leave, just 25 miles north of me was the border of California, and a huge fire was raging. Smoke was everywhere, and it was 105 degrees. Towns were evacuated. Homes and lives were destroyed in a matter of moments. And this week, even this morning, I heard of another California fire where people were warned to leave, to pick up a few of your valuables and leave now. And friends from all around rushed in to help. Possessions were lost. Relationships mattered. Have any of you or had friends who have had your homes and livelihoods destroyed by a fire or by a flood? I think of New Orleans, or closer to home, I think of Hurricane Sandy. What would you take quickly if you were told, gather things up immediately and run? Which of your possessions are the most important to you? What is ultimately really important? Having just cleaned out my home of 42 years with all its memories and my children's and my things, I was tasked to value what was most important to me. It was a hard lesson. Everything there, really, was just earthly things, with memories remaining alive in our hearts. It was my relationship with my family and my friends that came to help me, and my deep strength from God that gave me the help that I needed. I did not want to be like that poor rich man who was possessed by his possessions. He couldn't get enough. He hoarded everything, keeping it all for a rainy day. But Jesus says, when you die, all will be gone, and all you'll be hoarded with will eventually rot, and it will be destroyed. Why is this such a human story, people? For a human story, indeed it is. One of the top books now is How to Get Rid of Clutter and how to put it into 3 piles, what you love, what you like, and what you're going to give away. It's a top seller. The baby boomers are growing older and they are having to downsize, and what are they doing? They're getting rid of all their clutter. And I know personally, no of our children want to have the mahogany pieces and the antiques that we have hoarded all these years. IKEA reigns. I asked a friend of mine who admitted that she was a secret hoarder why this was. She said, I always think I may need something someday, and then I won't have to pay for it because I will have already paid for it, and it will be there for me. I have never seen the TV show called The Hoarder, but I can imagine why it has become a new DSM diagnosis. It can ruin one's life and confuse one's realistic priorities. Is it not a fear that drives some, or a feeling of insecurity in the world, having an inner emptiness, wanting money and property? Or it may be a hedge against poverty and distress. Things can also represent power, but be misused as power, and can represent a very short-lived status. How can we apply our heart and our thoughts to God's kingdom that we cease to be afraid and want nothing but the simple, everyday things God has already amply supplied us? In the parable contained in today's gospel, God calls the man who stores up all these abundance of food for years. What does he call him? But he calls him a fool. I can't help but make the connection with the foolish behavior that is so prevalent in today's super-size-it society, in our constant need to buy a lot more than we could ever consume, just, what, to be safe? To obtain a sense of security? Reverend Cutie says we often manifest the worst kind of human greed and wastefulness. Just think of how popular and massive storage units are in this economy. How is it we show great disregard for God's creation and the resources with which we have been so abundantly blessed? Jesus was always warning the disciples of the tendency for them and all of us to enslave ourselves to what we have. There is a human incipient greed in us that is so hard to kill. Jesus refers back to the Israelites being fed manna at the beginning of each day's waking in the desert, trusting God to provide our daily needs. As John Killinger warns us, the parables raise an unavoidable question about our stewardship in the church today. Some churches hold more property than many business corporations in their cities and have their most serious congregational meetings and squabbles over the maintenance and ownership of their buildings. Or we put more value on buildings than on the mission and ministry. All of our buildings, which United Church on the Green and Church of the Redeemer own, which we claim to be ours, all of them belong to God and are only historic containers here to house our mission and our ministry. As Reverend Scarborough warns us, as Christians, we are called to shift our focus away from the small, egocentric, and outward into a radical trust in God. When our focus moves outward in this way, we begin to view our wealth and our possessions so very, very differently, don't we? Not only has everything come from God, even our own talents by which we are able to obtain our wealth and our possessions are gifts from God. None of it belongs to us. It is all on loan. The poor rich fool hasn't figured out yet that the wealth that he claims isn't really his at all. He only has temporary custody of it. Now, a friend of mine was in St. Louis over the last weekend, and she arrived on crutches to the hotel. As she got out of her car to go into the hotel, a woman came to her and offered to help her. She took her purse and helped her into the lobby. When my friend arrived at her room, she realized that her iPhone had been stolen. It had been stolen out of her purse. And that was the second person that day, apparently, to have been robbed in the very same way. What it set up in my friend was the tremendous loss of all of her contacts, which had not been backed up. All of her pictures and her addresses and phone numbers of her friends and extended family were gone. The phone had been disabled immediately, and there was no way that she could retrieve them. You see, for her, her greatest possession was her relationships. Friends and connections are far more important than the price of her iPhone or the things in our houses or our storage units or in our banks. Most critical of all is our relationship with our God who provides for us, loves us, and offers us daily manna in our wildernesses. Remember, church, that Jesus left us a great spiritual legacy, but no property at all. Reverend Cutie, who is a Spanish missionary, invites us to allow the words of today's gospel resonate in our life. And I invite you to begin to experience what it means to be rich toward God, to be truly fresh and rich toward God, which requires a real change of attitude, which considers everything we have as a blessing from above, and to treasure those blessings by sharing them generously. And you certainly heard that through our children today in our children's circle, didn't we? Let the children come unto us. True Christian charity begins in the heart and then translates into heartfelt action. You know, as the great American comedian Bob Hope once said, if you haven't got any charity in your heart, you have the worst kind of heart trouble. And indeed, perhaps that is what we all may be suffering from, and that is heart trouble. The kind of heart trouble that makes us unable to fully experience the loving, great generosity of God. Furthermore, our inability to plainly see God's bountiful providence in our lives. When we come to terms with the fact that God's generosity is great, we begin to realize how much more generous and grateful we must be. We who are created in God's image and in God's likeness. And out of all of that gratitude for all that God has given us, may we truly prioritize what is really important in our lives. And so I ask you to take this question with you as you go out into the work week, out into urban New Haven, or into the greater communities, or even into the global economy and world. What would you take quickly if you were told, gather things up immediately and run? Amen.